And we are live. Nice. Let's see. Excellent connection. Stream health looks good. Cool, cool. Well then, so today we're gonna start off a small segment where we brew with these freshly roasted beans that I just did yesterday. And our experimentation will be with the Osmotic Flow technique, where it's normally suited for a darker roast. And this over here will hopefully be good with the Osmotic Flow because of its high CO2 content right after roasting. So we're kind of doing some experimentation to see if we can use a lighter roast with the Osmotic Flow technique. And the Osmotic Flow technique is normally meant for a darker roast. So yeah, that is what we're gonna play around with today and see if it works or not. Kind of excited. These beans look delicious. Here, let me just show it to you. Smell amazing too. But yeah, I'm excited because we're also gonna use the Kalita Wave. So I've gotten recommendations twice now saying that the Osmotic Flow technique would be good with the Kalita Wave instead of the Hario V60. So this is the Kalita Wave. It has a flat bottom versus the Hario V60, which is a cone-shaped bottom, so a tapered one. So yeah, we'll be using this guy. So what recipe are we going to start off with? Well, I was looking at my recipe sheet that I used for the Lord and Lady Osmotic Flow technique, and I think that we should just go with the best cup that we got from this area and combine that kind of with the Osmotic Flow video that I made. So I think the 1:13 brewing ratio with around 20 grams of coffee and a 80 degrees Celsius water temp with the 37 grind size would be great. So I'm gonna add that to my chart over here and fix that up. Hey Mark, so this is the small one. This is the 155 Kalita Wave. It's yeah, I think I just like the tiny ones because I always brew coffee for one person, aka me, and the big ones are just overkill for those portions. It's really easy to notice when you see the bigger version because the bigger version has a way bigger like angled taper. So this one is a bit more like squared looking versus the bigger Kalita Wave. Okay, so 1:13 brewing ratio, so we're going to use 20 grams of coffee, and that becomes 260 grams of water, and 80 degrees Celsius water temp, 37 grind size. So this is our recipe that we're going to use today. A 1:13 brewing ratio, 20 grams of coffee, 260 grams of water, 80 degrees Celsius water temp, 37 grind size. Okay, so let's begin. I'll move you down over here. Put this up like so. And the beans that we roasted were a Ethiopian Sidamo. So they look like this. And now they look like this after roasting. I still have more that I can play around with, but this is the batch that we'll be using in the next couple of days. So we're going for 20 grams of coffee. Like so. And since I haven't purged my grinder, I'm going to do that right now. So we got some minute rice. I was like brush the top. Pour in some of the rice. Get another cup. And purged. And now I'll take a bit of the new grinds, toss them in. Like so. And that's it. Now it's fully ready for the new beans. So this is 20 grams right over here. There we got the beans. And we're going to move this to 37, like so. Pour that in. There we go. 20 grams. Let's put this away, get our boiling water. Like so. And since we're not using boiling water, we need to lower the water temperature. So we're lowering it to 80 degrees Celsius. Let's do that. And let's also preheat. We got our Kalita Wave. We got our cup that we want to use. Like so. Got our wave filter. And let's continue to get down to 80 degrees Celsius. I think one of these days I'll have to invest in a temperature controlled kettle if I want to keep on doing these lower brewing temps, because it's kind of a hassle to manually do it with one of these guys all the time. I even drilled a hole over here in my kettle to make it so that it fit this thermometer. So it works, but it's just tedious. Hey, Nice seeing you again. Do you have any grinder recommendations? I'm planning on buying a new one during Black Friday. Good question. What's your budget? I think that would be the main focus that I would look into, and then I would see what lands into those deals, because things like the Baratza Encore is a great entry level grinder. If you want to look for something a bit high end, I would recommend going into hand grinders. So the Kinu or the Comandante C40 are like top end, really great hand grinders. And if you can get those on a Black Friday deal, you're kind of set for life with filtered coffee. I would not recommend this guy. This is the Ranchilio Rocky. It's a mediocre grinder. It's just too heavy for what it's worth, and it doesn't have like the fidelity or like the spectrum that I want, because it's like notched. So this is a stepped grinder versus a stepless grinder that I would probably look for in this price range. But yeah, what's your budget? Okay, so actually we're still not at 80. We're really close. And so 80 degrees Celsius. Let's pour out this water. Like so. Toss in our grinds. Like so. Shake that out. And our brewing process will be around 50 grams for a bloom, and then we're gonna wait a bit, and then we're gonna pour straight down the center for up until like 120 grams of water, and then we're gonna wait a bit, and then we're gonna draw circles around 1 inch in diameter around that center area. So that will be our process here. Let's see, I'm gonna move it a bit further away from this. Like so. Get a towel. Like so. Let's begin. So that's 50 grams. And then pour straight down the center. So, then we wait a bit, and then pour in circles. like so. 260. My budget will be around 3,000 Swedish kroners, around 300 euros. Since I'm a university student, I don't have a lot of money to splurge. Yeah, that's for sure a more than reasonable budget for a coffee grinder. I would say if you can get your hands on a hand grinder that is really top notch within that budget, so the Kinu or the Comandante C40, and you don't mind the slight labor that you need to do every morning, then I would go for one of those. And if not, I would probably just go for a standard Baratza Encore. See if you can get that on sale and use your remaining money towards more beans and just a constant fund of coffee beans, because that grinder is so good. And oh yeah, and also the Z Presso is supposed to be really decent these days. A lot of people say a lot of good things about that hand grinder. So I'll totally write these into the chat later on if you want. And that's the brew with that. Like, it looked the part, it did the thing, it had some degassing, but it didn't like bubble up and mushroom as big as I thought it would be. But we'll see how it tastes, because normally drinking a light roast so quickly after its roast date, so one day after, would just lead to a really bad and subpar cup of coffee. But maybe with the lower brewing ratio that we're using and the Osmotic Flow technique, we can actually achieve a good cup of coffee because of the lower extraction that we've been doing right now. So let's give it a taste. There we got the cup. Give it a stir. And a sippy time. It's a pretty decent cup of coffee. So, let's see. It's slightly on the so it doesn't have any crazy acidities or anything. It seems like a decent cup of coffee. My tongue is a bit raspy at the end of the sip, but I'm not sure if that is from over extractedness. I think it's more just perhaps the freshness of the bean that is shining a bit through. But yeah, I currently have a Harrier hand grinder and I'm used to the labor and don't mind. Yeah, I get the Kinu or the Comandante C40 or the Z1 Presso, I think it's called. One of those. And yes, sippy sip. Cheers, Andre. So, I have tried brewing a cup of coffee before with a roast date that is so close to when you actually brew. And this is a really delicious cup of coffee for that duration. So I've never had a good cup of coffee just one day after. Maybe maybe the lower extraction and higher ratio and process of the Osmotic Flow is really adding a lot to remove those CO2 bubbles, and like the CO2 doesn't hamper the brew as much compared to other methods. So this is really fascinating. I think that next time I should even like roast the coffee and brew with it like an hour after. to really get a lot of CO2, because I can already tell now that it's turning into more of like a standard cup over here. So yeah, like I think it's working. I think light roasts with the Osmotic Flow can work, and this is proof in the pudding right over here. Yeah, there's a lot of solid recommendations for hand grinders happening in the chat right now. I've never heard of the Normcore version 2. I would have to look it up. There's always like new grinders that are coming out all the time. And yet again, the Z1 Presso, I think it's called, or 1Z Presso. That one had all the hype not too long ago, and a lot of people were swapping from the Baratza Encore over to that hand grinder because of the quality grind consistency that you were getting. But if you want to go even higher end, and if you can find it within your budget during Black Friday, then the Kinu and the Comandante C40 are like the Ferraris of hand grinders, where you would never need to buy another one ever again. It's a joy to use and grind with, and it's just like a tool that you will have forever. So yeah. Oh, I have a lot of different hobbies, Andre. This is just the one that I'm dedicated to the most. So I'm actually going climbing after this, which will be fun. I've done some hydroponics setups. Used to play a lot of table tennis back as a kid, professionally. Uh, Played around with some mushroom growing, do a kombucha setup, do tempeh and kimchi, all the good stuff. Hydroponics. But yeah, like coffee grinders are interesting because you just need to buy one that is really good and you're set for life. But a lot of people consistently buy like lower end ones, and I think that spending that proper amount of money one time will save you the headache 5 years down the road, so that you don't need to upgrade it again. And it's just like my buddy told me this saying, buy it wait, what was it again? Buy it good or buy it twice. No, buy it like once and buy it. Oh my god, man, I gotta find it. I'm really bad at like remembering these sayings, but it's like buy it one time really well, or you would have to buy it twice. That is the gist of the saying. I did a project in high school, got a nostalgia flashback. Yeah, hydroponics, growing some greens or like bok choy for like soup and stuff. It's really simple, and if you have sunlight like me, you can set up a hydroponic setup with some clay balls and have a great time. Yeah, David brings in a really good point here, that hand grinders also have a really big perk of being easy to clean and also has a low retention. So do you see how I cleaned my grinder today with rice and like made sure that it was fully purged? Well, with the hand grinder, you won't have that much of a issue with swapping between beans. And with a big beast like this, I have to like take a bit more TLC to make sure that all of the grinds are fully flushed out. and make sure that is good. And I even 3D printed this small front part here so I could get into that chamber and remove the grinds in that mini zone that I couldn't access before. So yeah, there's a lot of perks with the hand grinder, and the big one for me is actually noise. So this is a huge motor that needs to be turned on at like early in the morning. If you have a hand grinder, it's very silent and calm. So low retention means when the grinder actually has a bit of grinds remaining in the grinder somewhere, meaning that you need to purge it to get out and flush out those old grinds to then get all new grinds in your grinder. So I can actually show it to you over here. This over here usually has a lot of grinds in it if I don't clean it every single time and I use like a stick to remove all of the grinds from the center. So this over here would be retention, where grinds are still in here until the next day where I grind coffee again and it comes out and pushes out old grinds. So that is retention in your coffee grinder. And since a hand grinder just goes straight from the burrs into the chamber that you are dosing into the brew, there is hardly any retention, and all you need to do is use a nice brush the inside and the outside, and that's it. No more grinds in there. So I am actually very surprised with this cup. The more that I think about it, being able to achieve such a good coffee one day after the brew is amazing. This is really, in my opinion, groundbreaking, and I should push it even closer. So the next time when I roast some beans into a light roast, I should brew with it like an hour after, see if I can still achieve a good cup of coffee. Because normally the CO2 buildup in the coffee is hampering the brewing process and extraction, which is why you don't want to brew your cup of coffee right after roasting. But I think maybe with the Osmotic Flow you can still achieve and get a good cup of coffee at those early hours of the roasting, after the roasting process. So there's a lot of experimentation that needs to be had here, now that we know that one day after produces a pretty decent cup of coffee. And I would say that this one is probably a bit under extracted. So I'm gonna add a dash of water and see what happens. Do you think cloth filters make a big difference? Or what are differences compared to paper? I actually have a video on that. You should totally check it out, but it matters a lot. The quick summary is that cloth, paper, and fabric filters matter a lot. If you want to have a clean cup, no sediments, and really have like a tea-like experience, then paper is amazing. If you want to have more of the oils in your cup of coffee that provide that more thick and viscous body, but still have a lot of clarity in your cup, then a fabric filter is amazing, because it allows those oils to go through the fabric and actually be incorporated into your cup instead of actually being caught by the paper filter. And if you want to have a bit more of a sedimenty and gritty cup of coffee, then metal is the way to go, because it allows the oils and a lot of the very small fines to get through your cup of coffee, like a French press, to then get that gritty and hearty texture in your cup. So yeah, there's a lot of exploration that you can be doing within filter types and even the filter quality itself. But yeah, check it out. And also try out a fabric filter. It really does change the cup of coffee a lot. Oh man, it's so hot in here. Like the sun is like beating down on me. And it's like, so I actually think this is a success over here. What I'm going to do tomorrow, I think, is to just brew a decent cup of coffee with these beans again, trying to replicate this osmotic flow. I want to see if I can use the same recipe to get the exact same cup. Because what happens when the CO2 level starts dropping in the beans? Will that impact the way that it is being brewed with in the osmotic flow? Because right now we were still getting a pretty decent bed. It looks like a osmotic flow bed where the bubbles are in the center because of the CO2 buildup. It did have slightly that dome shape going on, but I do think that maybe tomorrow or the day after, the amount of CO2 might have like dissipated or gotten like removed from the beans to then not make it viable anymore for a osmotic flow technique. So yeah, experimentations will be had. Where did I get my shirt? This is from a store that is closed down called New Van Gogh, and it's really rad, the concept that they had, but it was also a really expensive t-shirt. But it was a Toronto-based artist, a Toronto-based company tee, and also the t-shirts were also Toronto-based made. So it was like hyper focused on Toronto scene of like t-shirts and artists. New Van Gogh. How many days after roast do you recommend the osmotic flow for different grind sizes? You know what? I have no idea. I haven't played around with the duration after the roasting time that much with the osmotic flow. So the osmotic flow is just a very new technique for me, and I think that I would have to explore and play around even more to give you a proper answer for that. Do you know what the differences between the Kino models are? No, but there is one of them that I always recommend, but I forget what the name is. But it's the one that is mostly bought. I know that's a weird recommendation there, but I can get back to you on that, because there is one of the Kino ones that I was like, oh yeah, this is obviously the one that I should be getting when I was looking it up for myself in the past. But yeah, there's always a lot of hand grinders out there to look up. And yeah, there's always a lot of grind sizes and roast dates to play around with. So, yet again, we're going to use the same recipe tomorrow, and we're going to try to replicate this cup over here and see if we can achieve that. And if we can, we want to do it again the next day, because I want to see how much the lack of CO2 impacts the cup and the brewing process. Yeah, I'm pleasantly surprised with this cup. Like, I think I would be able to brew a better cup of coffee at a higher brewing ratio with these beans over here. But just bringing it back to how fresh the beans are, I don't think I could be able to do it right now. Maybe I should explore with that, like brew 2 cups side by side and see how I can maximize it in each. That's something for a future video for sure. Yeah, so what technique did I prefer before the osmotic flow? So I actually don't prefer the osmotic flow. I prefer a simpler technique like the James Hoffman, where it's a high extraction, pour a lot of the liquid, do the Scott Brow swirl, and really focus on just a level bed and high temperatures. I personally prefer James Hoffman's technique because I use a lot of light roasts. And I'm only getting into dark roasts very recently, and that's why I'm doing all these explorations within the dark roast territory, and now using a light roast with the osmotic flow to see what can happen and where it can take me. But yeah, I would recommend the osmotic flow only if you're going into darker roasts for now. So I would still recommend the James Hoffman pour over technique, and that's what I would use. I've been looking a lot at the Japanese pour over part on Insta, and I've noticed that they sometimes don't even use scales when brewing. Well then, I would say always use a scale unless you are so like perfect in maybe measuring out the water beforehand in your kettle, or you know where on the cup that the liquid needs to hit, and then you remove the brewer. But once you start understanding these like thresholds in your brewing system, then you still just need to weigh out your beans and do it from there. But I would say always just use a scale. It's a good habit to get into. It can make sure that things don't go wrong and you don't mess up any of the weights. And it's just a good habit, and it's a great way to actually tweak your recipe if you want to make changes. So in a heavy, like busy cafe setting, I always set like these benchmarks on different cups. And even for milk steaming, when I was steaming milk, you don't use a thermometer, you use your hand heat response. So once it was too hot to hold, like 2-3 seconds after that was perfect milk temperature. So finding those like cues in your setup that will then give you an amount is probably what they're doing. So yeah, there is probably not a scale being used, but I bet that they have some kind of a measuring system in their own world that is saying, oh yeah, now you can take off the brewer, or now you can stop pouring. Yeah, and David Maurice has a awesome video on the osmotic flow. You guys should totally go and check that out. The bloom is amazing, the dome is amazing, it just looks magical. Yeah, and we even have him in the chat over here. So he's saying, thanks, I do pre-measure the amount of water beforehand so that I don't have to worry about it. So even though a lot of people, it seems like they're not using a scale, they just have different systems that allow them to measure it out differently. So there's always accuracy involved, and sometimes a scale is not part of it, or they pre-measure things, or they figure out a level that is perfect for them and then they stop it at that level. So yeah. Yeah, intense blooms, but they seem like they wing their recipe. And yet again, it seems like they're winging it on paper, but if you get to pick their minds and ask them in the comments and stuff, I'm pretty sure they got some kind of a system going on. So another question, water temperature for James Hoffman method, do you just use as hot as possible? And I personally don't like that approach. It's it's really downplaying the importance of water temperature in a brewing process. I've also made a video on this where I think that people should be brewing with cooler water temperatures, especially because not everyone is using the same type of beans as James Hoffman. He's only using premium light roast coffees, like hardly any medium to dark roast coffees, and that roast level is perfect for extremely hot temperatures because you want to try to extract as much as possible from those fats and acids and sugars that are more susceptible for a higher brewing temperature. But if you're using something that is a bit more on the medium roast or even a darker roast, then a lower brewing temperature is amazing. And you should be exploring with 90 degrees Celsius, 80 degrees Celsius to really get a different type of balanced cup out of your brew. So coffee is really just a exploration of variables, and by locking it in and saying like, oh yeah, I'm always going to brew with boiling water, really is not using those gears. So you have a car that can go up to the 6th gear and you don't ever change water temperature, well, now you can only use 5 gears. If you never change brewing ratio, now you can only use 4 gears. You can still drive the car, you can still get from A to B, but you just don't get that speed difference. You don't get to play around with the possibilities of the car. Yeah, it's fun. I was done to answer all these questions. You can also always ask in the videos that you end up watching, and I'll reply to you over there if you have any questions too. But I must say, coffee is just one of those hobbies where the more that I learn about it, the more questions that I have. And I've been in coffee for close to 10 years now. And in the beginning, I was just learning as a barista, and like learning the ropes and just trying to understand the whole process and doing latte art and stuff. But now it's way more about just being very clear about what makes a good cup of coffee, and trying to maximize that for the masses, meaning just educate well and teach and share my knowledge so that a lot of people can brew a good cup of coffee at home. So if you do have any more questions, Andre, then feel free to ask those in the videos that you end up watching. And yeah, successful live stream, solid questions, I love it. Solid brew also, very surprising. And we'll see what happens tomorrow. Maybe the technique won't work anymore because of the CO2 has now left the coffee beans. Maybe it won't give us that dome shape anymore. But yeah, we'll see what happens. Today I'm probably just gonna I'm gonna go climbing later, but I'm also gonna do some editing on the old live stream archive. So I'll be taking one bag of beans that I've live streamed and just add more information and make it into like a small, like 5 to 10 minute video where I talk about where the beans are from, my process going from brew 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on, the tastes that I were like experiencing, and if I would get the beans again. So a lot of extra insight into those live streams that I wasn't able to add in the beginning. But yeah, a lot of things in the pipelines. So I'll see you all maybe tomorrow. Have a great day, enjoy your coffee, and yeah, make sure to check out David's video on the Osmotic Flow because he is using a dark roast in his video and the mushroom is amazing. So go and check him out. He's in the comments right now, and be amazed by how the Osmotic Flow can sometimes look like when it's all properly done. Have a great day, everyone. See ya all laters.
Ciao.